The little girl was standing barefoot in the middle of a crowded city street when the most feared Mafia boss in the city stopped his black SUV and stepped out. She was soaked from the morning rain, her thin sweater covered in dirt, and she was desperately clutching a torn photograph against her chest as if it were the only thing in the world she had left. People walked around her without looking twice, but when she saw the tall black man approaching, she didn't run. Instead, she lifted her chin and stared directly into the eyes of a man whose name made criminals tremble. What happened next would change both their lives forever. Before we continue, if you believe kindness can give someone a second chance, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and subscribe to Heartline Stories. Because sometimes, the person you save today becomes the person who saves you tomorrow. His name was Malachi Vance, a powerful underworld boss known throughout the city for his ruthless business empire and terrifying reputation. But behind the dark suits, expensive cars, and armed guards was a secret almost nobody knew. Malachi was a single father. His 8-year-old son, Kendrick, was the only person who could make the hardened man smile without trying. Every morning, Malachi personally walked Kendrick into his private school before leaving for meetings that often involved dangerous men and dangerous decisions. He had money, power, and influence, but none of it could erase the emptiness left after losing Kendrick's mother years earlier. That morning, while returning from a meeting, Malachi noticed the homeless girl standing alone beneath the gray afternoon sky. Her name was Soraya Bell. She was only 11 years old, but hardship had forced an adult sadness into her young eyes. Her mother had died months earlier after a long illness, and her father had disappeared shortly afterward, leaving Soraya with nothing but an old photograph, a small backpack, and memories she refused to let disappear. She had been sleeping wherever she could find shelter, sometimes beneath a staircase, sometimes behind a closed bakery, and sometimes on a bench in the park during the warmer nights. That morning, hunger had become so painful that she could barely stand. Malachi approached her expecting fear, but Soraya simply looked at him and asked if he knew where she could find work. The question stopped him cold. Most children her age would have asked for food. She was asking for work. Malachi looked at the bruises on her wrists and the torn shoes on her feet and realized somebody had failed this child long before he found her. He quietly ordered his driver to bring food, but Soraya refused to get into the car until Malachi promised she wouldn't be sent back outside. Something about her determination reminded him of himself. He had also learned as a child that the world could take everything from you if you weren't strong enough to fight back. Malachi took Soraya home, not because he trusted her, but because he couldn't leave her there. Kendrick was initially confused when his father brought a strange girl into their mansion, but within hours the two children were sitting together at the kitchen table sharing dessert. Soraya hadn't tasted anything that sweet in years. She tried to hide her tears, but Kendrick noticed. Without saying much, he pushed his favorite piece of cake toward her. That tiny act of kindness became the beginning of a bond none of them could have imagined. Soraya stayed one night, then another, and eventually Malachi hired a private tutor to help her catch up in school. He gave her clothes, books, and a bedroom, but he never tried to buy her love. He simply gave her something she had never known before: stability. Soraya slowly began to laugh again. She discovered that she was brilliant with numbers and technology, while Kendrick became her closest friend. Malachi watched them grow from a distance, pretending to be stern whenever they made a mess, but secretly cherishing every moment. Years passed. Soraya transformed from a frightened homeless child into a confident young woman. She studied computers, cybersecurity, and business, eventually becoming one of the brightest minds in Malachi's organization. But she never forgot the rainy morning when he found her. She remembered the food, the warm bedroom, and most importantly, the fact that he had looked at her like she mattered. Then, 15 years after that first encounter, everything changed. Malachi was now older, and the empire he had built was facing its greatest threat. A rival criminal organization had been quietly infiltrating his businesses for months. One afternoon, while sunlight streamed through the enormous windows of his office, Malachi suddenly collapsed. His guards rushed toward him, but Soraya, now 26, noticed something nobody else did. His computer system had been compromised, and the security alarms were being triggered from inside the building. She immediately realized it was a trap. Someone had planned to kill Malachi while making it look like an internal betrayal. Soraya locked down the building's digital systems and discovered that the person responsible was someone Malachi trusted deeply, his longtime accountant, Darius Crow. Darius had secretly sold information about Malachi's movements to the rival organization. The attack had already begun. Soraya didn't hesitate. She used everything Malachi had taught her, every skill she had developed, and every lesson she had learned from surviving on the streets. She rerouted the building's security, locked the attackers outside, exposed Darius's communications, and called emergency medical help for Malachi. By the time the rival gang reached the building, police were already surrounding the area because Soraya had anonymously sent them the evidence. Malachi survived. When he woke in the hospital, Soraya was sitting beside his bed, exhausted, her eyes red from crying. For the first time in years, the feared Mafia boss looked completely vulnerable. He reached for her hand and held it tightly. He had spent 15 years believing he had rescued a homeless girl from the streets, but now he understood the truth. He hadn't saved Soraya. He had simply given her the chance to save herself. And 15 years later, she had saved him. Malachi eventually walked away from the criminal world, using his fortune to build shelters, scholarship programs, and community centers for children who had nowhere to go. Soraya became the director of the foundation, determined to make sure no child would ever again believe that being poor meant being worthless. Kendrick became a lawyer and helped protect the foundation legally. Together, the three of them turned one act of kindness into a lifetime of second chances. If this story touched your heart, please don't just watch silently. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to believe that kindness still exists, and subscribe to Heartline Stories so more stories like this can reach people who need hope. And before we end, make this special request in the comments: I believe one act of kindness can change a life. Because sometimes, the person standing in front of you doesn't need a miracle. They just need one person willing to stop, look them in the eyes, and say, without words, you matter. Malachi thought he was giving Soraya a home. 15 years later, he discovered that the home he gave her had created a family, and the little girl he once rescued had become the woman who rescued him.